Hello, everybody, and welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to CLCI Live.
Yes, it's another week. And we are, before we begin, just going to remind everybody to like and subscribe. Hit that button right now. Do it for us. And also make sure and join in the convo. We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to ask us questions or join in the conversation.
Okay.
And that is all. I'm not yawning, I swear.
Before we begin, has this month been flying? We're already at March 18th.
Unbelievably.
We were just in February. I don't understand what happened.
Yeah, it's flying by real fast.
What's the facetious tone there?
There's no facetiousness. It's just I don't know what to say about it. It feels like it's flying by fast for me too.
Well, especially you. Yeah.
It's more so just like I need time to slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys said flyby, I thought we were doing double entendre for the bees situation
Oh,
going on over
Yeah,
there.
for our dedicated listeners who've been following us for a while, we've got bees. There's bees somewhere in the walls. I hear buzzing in the walls, and there's honey coming out of the electrical sockets. And
For
there's
real, or are you making that up?
There's bears trying to get into our house.
You're-
No, there's just like some bees that are coming in through the walls. Nothing to be overly concerned about.
It's pretty concerning, though.
I mean, we see it. We can seal off the room that they're coming in from, and maybe we'll get a guest call from the exterminator, and we can have them live on the show with us. Figure out an ethical way to get rid of the bees. But
What's
before
our
that,
topic?
yes, we're talking self-sabotage. Last week we talked about masks and how they hurt us. This week we're talking about why trusting your gut can be awful. Why you probably shouldn't trust your gut sometimes, and maybe think with your brain. I'm making like a dualist kind of statement there.
Trusting your gut, trusting your intuition, all of these things are kind of interchangeable. And we are going to discuss the reasons why it might not be the best idea.
So
I didn't come up with too many.
I came up with a bunch.
Well, good that we have a nice contrast going on then.
Yeah.
well, let's just start with
We got to define it.
no,
What?
not even that.
We're not defining it.
What
know
does
what-
intuition mean?
We
have
didn't
to
say
define it.
intuition. We said our gut. That's different.
Not to me.
I think they're pretty interchangeable.
I don't.
I think so too.
What's
Why
the
don't
difference for you?
okay, well, why don't you think it's interchangeable vocabulary?
So intuition is like my understanding of something. Like, so for example, if I'm really good at playing an instrument or I'm really awesome at disc golf, and through time and practice and experience, I can just play a song without thinking, or I can throw a disc with one fell swoop into the basket. I'm using intuition. I don't have to reason. I don't have to go off feeling either. I'm just doing what is a deeper understanding than just like, the basics. With a gut, though, I think of that as a feeling. Like an actual emotion is like a gut feeling where I'm reacting to something and I'm making a decision based off of, I don't know, something that's intangible. Like, when you're walking down a dark alley or a street and you get a gut feeling, oh, maybe I shouldn't like walk down this alleyway at midnight.
I think you have brought up good points that like can be addressed in both of those spaces, and I'm like, I almost don't want to forget my train of thought here, and I want to like make a note. Uh, because I think what you're mentioning about intuition is this sort of inclination in us as people to identify patterns and want to identify patterns and want us to assume that there are patterns in
Mhm.
and that's like a natural way our brains think. It's something that we do naturally as a result of I mean it's part of our survival instincts. Like we look for patterns because if there are patterns then we know how to maneuver a particular situation. So our brain is always, it's hardwired to be looking for patterns.
It's not woo woo. I said it's not woo woo.
Yeah, and believing that those patterns are always going to be consistent, or that we're going to be able to glean some knowledge from knowing those patterns or observing the patterns or being able to. So like when you mentioned playing an instrument, right? That was one of the things you brought up, that you're learning patterns, right? You're learning musical notes. You're learning how to string them together. You're learning how that works in a piece of music. And that is essentially learning patterns, right? But that is something.
Muscle memory too is involved. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it becomes something that that becomes kind of reliable, right? Because you know that there's a pattern. But this is also where the problem is. Like that's also why it becomes dangerous. All of those reasons is why it can become dangerous. Do you guys have any idea why that might be? Or have you thoughts or?
Because then you start operating from that perceived pattern as truth or as right.
You develop a bias.
Yes.
We start to believe that our patterns are true and always true. And we start to develop biases. We start to have, and it may not be the case. Like that might not be the case at all. And so we're constantly starting to, wanting to believe that there are patterns and that there's going to be, if A plus B equals C, or if I do this, this will be the reaction. But the reality in the world, that is not always the case.
Yeah, especially, if that bias, we're trying to apply it to somebody else who does not have that bias. Right? That can be an issue, an argument. They don't understand. They are not, we get into that bias labeling possibility and thinking that we're always right. We've had some people that we've interacted with that feel like they are always right. They are the what's the word I'm looking for? Grounding fork, if you will. I can't think of the word I'm actually thinking of for the situation when that's not exactly true.
The truth of the matter is we can often be so strongly desire to identify patterns that we can start to create patterns where patterns don't even exist. That's the other piece of it. Like we can start and we can believe it to be true, right? We can believe it to be true. And it may just be that pattern does not exist, but it just is a coincidence that 2 times in your life something happened that way, but 2 times does not constitute a pattern. However, for your personal experience, you now believe there is a pattern there. And if you start making, big decisions or big, things based on that perceived pattern, you could find yourself in some very sticky situations, because eventually it's not going to happen that way. You've probably just gotten a little lucky if it's happening, you think about the person that has gone gambling and, I every time I bet on black, I win. Well, the reality is at some point that lucky streak's going to end and you're going to lose. And that is just how it is. And it's not a pattern true to you that when you show up to the table to put a bet on black, suddenly all of the odds turn to your favor. That is not the case, right? So we have to be really cautious about starting to, while those patterns are very helpful, and in some cases they may be true, in many cases they may also not be true. If we take that and we apply that to coaching, what does that tell us?
To not assume. Don't assume.
As coaches?
Yeah.
Can we be more specific?
Yeah.
Just-
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just because somebody who you may be coaching came to a certain conclusion with an instance that's similar to another client, um, doesn't mean it's going to be the exact same situation for that
Mhm.
other person.
Yeah.
Maybe it's your personal experience, or maybe, it's anything, assuming, or maybe it's that when that client is getting teary-eyed, and we assume that their tears are in their eyes is because they're sad. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe they have allergies. Maybe the light that you're shining into their eyes and and you didn't realize it is causing them to tear up. So, but we can immediately jump to that conclusion. Oh my God, they're sad. What's wrong? And it may not be the case. So it becomes important to ask, right? That's the other piece. It becomes important to ask.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what works for one person is not guaranteed to work for another person. And so we have to keep that in mind. Everything that comes into the space as a new idea has to be tried on. Same way you would try on clothing. The idea has to be tried on, and the client has to be asked what they think and what they feel when they try that idea on. You can't just roll with it and assume that it's going to fit.
And the other part in this that can be a little scary is if we get so reliant on assuming this pattern is right that we throw out research and data and whatever it might be, it can become very dangerous, right? We want to also, considering those things becomes important rather than just relying on intuition. The second part you talked about, Anthony, was like trusting your gut and feeling.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have a feeling about something. Talk a little bit more about that.
So usually with decisions, like you often hear people say, well, I'm going to go with my gut. I'm just going to trust my gut. I'm going to go with whatever inclination is pulling them that way, that I don't see as based on anything other than just your emotional state at the time. But Jen, you mentioned that you feel that gut and intuition is kind of the same thing, right?
I feel that a gut feeling is involved in my process of identifying intuition. So to me, intuition is a combination of thoughts and feelings. It's, more so feeling than thoughts, but both come into play for me.
Yeah, I'm making the distinction then that gut is purely just feeling and intuition is thought and feeling, or like experience. Maybe
Okay.
not even thought. I'm taking thought out of the equation. Thought doesn't go into gut or into intuition. Intuition is your gut plus your experience with something.
Okay.
And that's why I give more credence to intuition than your gut. But the reason why gut can be self-sabotaging is people will say, well, I'm just going with my intuition. When really it's just an emotional response to something.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't
So
work.
we were emotional when we hired Jen.
Yes.
Great.
Actually is a good experience of a gut feeling that worked out.
Oh my God.
I would not say that was based on intuition.
It worked out for me though.
But it all works out. And that's like hold on. That's the survivorship bias of gut feelings. Because you have gut feelings that do work out sometimes. And then for the rest of your life, you're gonna be like, well, I'm gonna just trust my gut.
Yeah, that's so true.
Until it doesn't work out.
And then
Now what do I do?
Yeah, we had an experience where we ran with it and it didn't work out too.
we absolutely have. And that, this trusting your gut can also be muddied by other things. Can you think of other things that might screw up your gut instinct? Like, even if let's say we do have this gut
Pretender.
Anxiety is a big one. I used to be very confused. I used to think anxiety was my gut, for sure. I used to think that that's just what it was, but I've learned to make a distinction.
Talk more about that. Kind of, what do you mean by you used to think that anxiety was your gut?
So I would just think that I had feelings all the time. Like perfect examples with flying. I got a gut feeling. Don't get on the plane, Jen. It happens every time, guys. Every time I fly, it's like, oh, there it goes again. Some random thing telling me not to get on the plane. It's literally just I'm scared to fly. Like I don't like the idea of flying. And that's it. It's never going to change. But I recognize like it's not really a sign of anything. It's just my anxiety talking to me.
Which is a very good example. Yes.
What if-
So in the reading, another term, the anxiety that you're speaking of is an overthinking response.
Yeah, it could be. I also think it's just kind of like I don't understand how flying actually works, like at all. Like it seems like magic to me. So because I don't
We'll
understand
take
it
the
at all.
rest of the time to just explain how flying works. I also, related to this, I have a picture that has an airplane on it that also is supposed to illustrate gut feelings and intuition, how they're
I
wrong.
guarantee you
But-
that even if it's explained to me, I'm still going to be like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't seem
Well, you know how like
possible.
like manta rays and fish, they can swim and they don't fall. It's like the
They're
same
in
thing.
water.
Yeah, air is like water, and you're swimming with an airplane.
Not to
on
Jen.
air because you're going so fast.
I don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
The Jen's
There's a very good explanation there.
Well, you know how like paper airplanes, they kind of just like coast. An airplane is just doing that.
But they
forever.
eventually crash. Paper airplanes eventually crash.
So do airplanes.
There's no
But-
pilot.
but the airplane crashes in a very controlled and easy, gentle manner until it lands and everybody lives.
I also think for me, like I think a lot of times I don't want to die that way. So there's certain things that's like I'm not gonna risk dying that way. And I've had to just understand that logically I have more of a risk of being killed by so many other things that it's kind of silly to worry or like, strategize my life around this idea that I don't want to die on a plane.
Just to go down this rabbit hole just for a second longer. So like if you had like, let's say you had like a pill with you that would cause like
Instant death, cyanide.
instant blissful death, 10 seconds and 5 seconds, 2 seconds, instant blissful death, and you carried that with you on the plane. Would you feel a little better?
I wouldn't feel better about that because the idea of taking that and then I could have survived is terrible.
Just a little bit of turbulence and then
No.
Yeah, so
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
your gut doesn't really justify like what objective reality is. And if you kept on trusting your gut, you would just never get on an airplane, which
If I kept
I
identifying
think is
my
fine.
anxiety as my
Mhm.
gut, yes, then I wouldn't get on an airplane. If I didn't learn to distinguish between anxiety and real gut feeling.
So
I mean,
what
sometimes
is
I have a real gut feeling.
So what happened? Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony. I know you're going. I was just curious though. What
yeah.
happens if your plane did crash, and your instinct or anxiety told you that it
And
was?
you're not on the plane. I would say that. You're
Oh,
also
fair.
not on the
I
plane.
was like, well, she'd be dead probably.
I see. So you're saying, what if I had the gut feeling, anxiety, whatever, and then I didn't get on the plane and then the plane did crash? I would probably believe that was,
Now,
Real.
but
Real.
let's say you've done that, like you have gotten on the plane 500 times before, and it
Mhm.
has had no issue.
yeah. Like,
At that point, though, I would assume I'm in the Final Destination movie, and death is coming for me anyways. So,
it's going to happen one way or another now.
Jen, can I ask then, if your gut is not anxiety, then what is your gut?
My gut, it's a little slower. Those initial and this was in one of the research bits. It was like a lot of people say that your gut is quick. And for me, yes, sometimes, but I like to give it more time to like really check in before I trust it. So sleeping on it or just, marinating on it for a little bit longer instead of taking action from that quick snap, because sometimes it evolves.
I am like super with you there because like I feel like maybe I like my gut is sort of doesn't not present or doesn't matter as much until like I've done a ton of research. And then once I've done a ton of research and I've like laid out the positives and negatives, I've done my lists, I've talked to all the people I need to talk to, I will then like sometimes just sit and think about it and let it kind of sit with me, maybe sleep on it, and then I will know like, okay, this is the choice, this feels good, my gut is telling me I'm making the right choice at this point. But it's usually for me with a great deal of research, and once I've done a lot of other things, it's not like a boom bah kind of thing. Whereas I do feel like intuition to me feels a little like a more instant, so kind of like the opposite for Anthony, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just looking at something. It says, it's a sense of knowing that doesn't come with the physical tension. That's the intuition. Whereas the anxiety comes with physical discomfort.
I'm on the same boat as Anthony in that train of thought. Yeah, I feel like your gut it's much more of an emotional based response. Intuition, once you start doing research and stuff like that, then that becomes intuition to me. But that's just my personal belief.
Like, it's so funny that we have two different, but that tells you why we don't want to assume anything, right?
Yeah, if anyone uses any of these words, you better ask what they mean, because if not,
your client's going to have a completely different idea of what their gut is.
Yes.
Now, the other piece of this too to think about is complexity, right? So the more complex the situation is, I think the less we can trust things like intuition and instinct, right? The more, when something has a lot of complexity and nuance to it, just going with the instinct and the gut is gonna be a lot more murky, I would imagine. What are your thoughts there?
I would agree. For sure.
I think. Oops.
Oh, I was gonna say I have seen this in two different scenarios, but they're actually not that different when you think about it. One is working at a casino. Every day you get to see people trust their gut instinct, and they always lose, and the house always wins. And the reason why is because the house is using statistics and research and analysis on their side, and all of the people coming to the casino are trusting their guts and trusting luck and just going with their instincts, or they might be willingly going with it and being okay with the losses. But the ones that I would see every day are trusting their gut, hoping to win, and they're never going to win. The second place I see this where trusting your gut is like in the stock market and options trading, which is not so dissimilar from gambling. And trusting your gut, it doesn't statistically lead anywhere. It doesn't make you more or less likely to be able to be successful at something that is so immensely complicated that even the statisticians and the people who do this for a living, they have a hard time with beating the S&P 500.
That is why I trust robots
who have no guts.
Yes, who have no guts to do my investing for me. Beyond, okay, but go ahead. Yes, Jen.
You know where though trusting your gut comes in real handy is when you're school shopping for life coach training. Because at some point your gut is going to tell you, like, I like these people, I like the vibe, I like the offering, I like the price, I like the time, and it's all just going to kind of click, and you're going to go, my gut tells me that that's the right school for me. Us,
And
your gut is right. If it's not us, I
you don't trust your gut.
Just kidding. But I mean, that's the same with hiring a coach, right?
Yeah.
You're going to talk with them. You're going to get a sense about whether they are the person for you. I mean, that would be your doctors. I mean, that's anybody that you're in and exchange with.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing that I think I have an opposite opinion on. I think with like interpersonal relationships, like I think I'm all about trusting your gut sometimes, or like
yeah.
the vibes, I think is
Yeah.
another word to say. Like if the vibes are off with like if you're dating someone new or you're looking for a new coach or shopping for a new doctor, if the vibes are off and your
Yes.
gut's telling you no and you can't really articulate why,
Yes.
go with your gut.
Yeah. For
um,
sure.
I don't know why that is the case.
Well, I
I'll
think
say that.
I think when I ask my next line of questioning, I think that is going to sort of maybe lead us to why that might be the case. So given like the amount of information we have now, right? Like, you know, even 20 years ago, we did not have nearly the amount of access to information that we have as we do now. 40 years ago, even less. 60 years ago, even less. So that, of course, I'm sure has made some change in opinion with trusting our gut and intuition. We can talk about that in a second. But given in a world now where we have all of this information and access at our hands, what do you think it is that makes somebody go, well, I'm going to trust my gut, I'm going to trust my intuition, I'm going to rely on that, instead of using all of this information and tools and things that we have at our fingertips?
I think a false sense of urgency where, let's say, people or advertisers, businesses might try to create a false sense of urgency, and you just gotta go with your gut. You gotta shoot from the hip to make a decision. But in the reality is, you can stop and take time to think, mull things over a little bit. You don't have to make a decision right now in the moment. That's one instance I can think of.
I can think of. Oh, sorry. Go, Jerome.
I was gonna say, quick. There is moments of actual, moments of urgency where you do have to trust your.
Yeah,
gut.
then you just have to trust your gut. You don't have a choice to wait.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, and I think I see this in clients sometimes, you can just take a beat. You don't have to go make life-changing decisions today, this hour.
Experiment, yeah.
You just find out when it's actually an emergency and when it's urgent versus when you're just imagining it or you're being told it is.
What other reasons?
I think trusting your gut comes into play, at least for me, it does a lot when I get into overwhelm and analysis paralysis. So when I need something like new tech. So like there's a couple things that I need.
Too much information.
It's information overload. I've researched so much that I'm just like, screw this. Like I just need to make a decision. And it's because I'm not willing to continue on in that analysis process. It's sometimes information can be, I don't know what the word is. It can be too much. And I would like it to be simpler. And I don't want 15 different choices to research. I just would like a couple choices, and then I'd like to make my choice.
I would love to see Jen
I was just talking to
buy and build a computer. That would be so much fun.
I was just talking to a friend about how I wanted a beta fish for my birthday, but like that all of that was birthed out of, I started with, I wanted pictures for above my TV. It's like pictures, like some kind of art that was like dimensional art and wasn't like a square that had like a weird shape. And from there, I started to research, and that took me down rabbit holes. And then I found a really awesome fish tank, and that I could mount on the wall.
A tank of
Then I was like,
water
no,
above the
inefficient.
expensive TV was a good idea.
No, and then of course that's a terrible idea, right? So like, but like, and now I still do not have anything above the TV. I went so far down the rabbit hole that I just abandoned altogether. And I was talking to her, and she was like, "Oh, I understand that. It took me 8 months to buy one curtain." Like, and I was like, yeah, like,
I can
and I'm like, and I'm like, that's, it can just be this thing where like it just becomes so much, and I totally get that. Where
Yeah.
now there's so many options. I'm not going to make any option, or I have to use my gut and just choose something, for sure.
When we were redoing our patio in California, I went to the slate. I was trying to go with slate and a coloration of slate. And I have to have a discussion with myself because there was the slate that was on sale, but the one that I really liked, right? And so part of that discussion became, am I going to know the difference in 3 months, in a year? Am I going to know the difference between these two shades or variations? And so I tend to do that kind of self argument, discernment, whatever the word would be appropriate there. Am I going to know the difference between now and this time? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter. I went with the sale.
That's a very good point, because there are times I have perseverated a very long time over something, but I've had the other way too, where I just bought something quick and easy, and I was like, why did I do that? I hate that.
Yes. Yeah.
Another one that maybe we haven't touched on is also, I think that there is a sense of ego that comes up with it, where like I know, I'm knowing, I have a special intuition. I have a special, in this particular situation, I can trust my gut. You know what I mean? And I think there comes this sort of, it's like it's a sense of ego. It's like, I mean, if we're talking like in a business sense, it can be a really big ego, right? Because now you're dealing with a bunch of, people are relying on you. In a personal sense, it might be a wanting to feel safe and secure in making your own decisions. And so there's a little bit of ego there. And if you choose wrong, it could shake that a bit, right? So we go with our gut and we just trust it and it's fine and go with it. But there might be a little bit of ego. I also think that when I mentioned all of this information, I think that, 100 years ago, there was probably a lot more brass tacks to being, or like you could put a lot more maybe weight or in trusting your gut. There's a lot more instances where you had to probably just go with something without a bunch of information, right? So maybe there's more value in that ability to trust your gut and to have intuition. Whereas I think now where we are, 100 years, looking at you fast forward, 100 years ago, everybody's much more isolated. We're separated. We don't have information there. You weren't in echo chambers. You're actually thinking for yourself. I think now though, we have to acknowledge that our gut and our instinct is influenced by what is going into what we're consuming 24/7. And that consumption is a lot of times tied to an algorithm that is showing you what you want to hear, what you want to see, what you want to do. And so your gut and your intuition is being molded for you by whatever it is you are consuming in the media, in TV, on your phone, wherever you're consuming information and data. And so your gut and your intuition is going to be affected by that. And you're probably in an echo chamber.
And the ego for some people is going to pop up and say, no, not me. That wouldn't happen to me. I'm smart enough to know. I'm smart enough to have discernment. And it's like, are we not all completely vulnerable to being manipulated? Because I think we are.
We absolutely are. Yeah, we absolutely are. We all are on some level.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question, because a lot of the times when we have clients come in, They want to trust our instinct, intuition, gut response versus their own.
Good point. Yeah.
How do we help them recognize?
I mean, I can just straight up tell them, like, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in your life and your decisions. I might be an expert in the question you're asking me. Like, if I was a, business coach and I've owned a business for 20 years, that kind of makes me an expert. That might be a bad decision, because if you've owned your own business for 20 years, you're only an expert in that specific business. You're not an expert in businesses in general. Ideally, you would have other people working with. Let's say you were like a doctor, maybe, and you're the expert. That's still not what you do as a coach, though. And when we're talking about goals, I'm not the expert in your goals or the things you want to achieve or your life. So you have to do the work, client, and tell me these things and tell me what your gut instincts are too. Because my gut instinct is that I'm listening to someone tell me a story. I'm not living your experience for you. And I can't do that. So my gut instinct doesn't really equate.
But
It doesn't go to the equation.
I've chosen wrong, and I've got it wrong, and I don't want to make that decision.
Okay, that's fine. So what could you do other than trusting your gut? Or maybe trusting guts in general? Maybe the issue is that you trust in people's guts rather than what you can research and analyze and think critically. That might be unintuitive, but still, the facts. What could you do to think along more along those lines?
And then the deeper level of that would be to ask into, well, what does it mean for you to get something wrong?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the ACC level question, which is a good question. It's a valuable question. And then there's the PCC or MCC level question, which, it's a deeper question. It changes the trajectory of the session a little bit. And it depends on your relationship with your client, I think, because for some clients, Anthony's question is more appropriate, in my opinion. And for some clients, the deeper question, I think, is. It just depends.
Or both of them. I mean, it could be, that client needs to go a little more slow in that direction, or that client might need to be able to move more quickly and drop down into that emotional section.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, there's something like to be said for in this, in like a lot of times what we're talking about when we're talking about trusting our guts is this feeling of unknown, like moving into this feeling of unknown. I have to make a decision to do something I don't know, it's this unknown space. So taking a moment, asking the client, what do you know? Like, let's talk about what do you know? What do you know right now in this moment? And starting to explore that space might be able to bring them a lot more confidence in making that decision. So like if we're talking about Jen, we get a lot of calls, people coming in to decide schools and things like that. Well, what do you know in this process of trying to pick a school? And every person who calls in is going to know what timeline they want to get their education in. They're going to know what kind of learning works for them and what kind of learning doesn't. They're going to know what kind of people they probably want to learn from. We've got a lot of things that we do know, and knowing those things can help us then figure out what making that decision be less scary, be more and feel more safe. So instead of shining that light on, well, make a gut decision and step into the unknown. Well, let's look at what you do know, and try to make the decision from that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can bring a lot more confidence to the client in that situation.
And I think that question too spans all levels: ACC, PCC, MCC, right, Lisa?
Yeah.
I think something in that too, it's kind of like meshing this idea, unknown, and again, sort of like slowly shining a light on that unknown situation. So I know, Anthony, you're about to talk. I was just going to ask a quick question, unless you've got something awesome.
No, it's not
Okay.
awesome.
So we've been talking a lot about how intuition can go wrong, right? I think we've talked about that quite a bit. If there's anything that you're like, oh, also here, shout it out, or maybe we'll bring it up in a second, or maybe if you're watching and there's something we missed or didn't think of, let us know. But I just want to sort of take a moment and talk about, as coaches, how we do use intuition and like what that means for us as a coach. Because I don't think in this we're saying that like intuition is always going to screw you over. I think that there is an important element that kind of harkens back to something Anthony said earlier that allows us to sort of intuit a bit in the coaching seat. And I'm stopping there. Your turn. Other four.
What's the question?
Yeah, I didn't hear the question either.
So the question is like, what are those spaces? Talk to me about this idea of intuition as a coach.
When we can use intuition as a coach.
When your client does one of these, they're talking straightforward to you, and then out of nowhere they go after you ask a question. Might be something that you intuitively ask about, because that's a shift in energy that could possibly lead to maybe answering some questions.
I had a session with Misha recently, and I said something, and then I made a bunch of crazy facial expressions. I was like, and she was so good about it. She was like, I'm noticing a lot of facial expressions that you're making. What can you tell me about that? Or just like a gentle observation and then a deeper curiosity. And it's like, yeah, I know you saw that. I'm feeling a lot. And I needed that. I needed so badly to allow that to be brought to the surface, whatever that was, because I was totally suppressing it with the facial expressions. That was me like fighting whatever was coming up. So
the noticing of patterns is what you're all is sharing.
Noticing of patterns, and then intuiting that there is something deeper going on to explore.
The noticing of patterns, though, Lisa, I feel like you're talking about over time working with someone when you notice patterns throughout
it could be depending on the client and that client's ability to just get into the coaching session versus having to take the time for that relationship to build. It could happen either way. And generally speaking, it does take a bit of time, and you'll pick up different patterns with the way they talk or the way they look or how they process or just how they have to say this in order to actually release and get that. So any of or all of the above. Jerome's talking about, to me, a pattern as well. When they take that moment and they take that deep breath and then they have that sigh afterwards, something landed. That's also a pattern, right? And that pattern, to dig deeper into that, or your facial expressions. Part of that pattern probably, and I don't know for sure, but I'm making an assumption at this moment, that you maybe have that pattern where you're in that processing state and thoughtful state, and whatever you're feeling in that moment, frustrated maybe or something, comes out in those expressions on your face.
So but like before we travel down this path, I want to pause though and say that recognizing the pattern is like recognizing that you're asking into those spaces, right? Asking into those things is important, and it's what you learn as a coach. I think what's even more important though is that we are asking into them without attachment, and I think that is what the biggest lesson that you learn as a coach is learning how to ask into that without an attachment or an assumption, because
where they need to be right.
You'll notice that when Jerome made the sigh, it might have been a sigh, maybe he had to burp. Jen might have had a weird hair in her face.
The
for all
pee in
we
the
know,
room.
right? Like, so we can't ask into that and assume that we know that what is happening with our client is happening with our client. It's important that as a coach we learn to ask and not have attachment. But I think a lot of new people who are walking into the class will take that moment and go, they'll add in an extra word, if right, like, was that a frustrated sigh, or are oh, are you look frustrated? They'll say something like that and shape it as a question, and it's still not what we want.
Right. It's a judgment. It's not an observation.
Yeah, we want to learn how to stop making the judgments and ask in a way that feels safe and open for our client to respond in whatever is true.
I like to think of it as you're asking about things that are factual, like that cannot be denied. So like, I noticed you just sighed. Is there anything you want to share about that? Or is there,
That was just a burp.
What can you, okay. Right?
I noticed you're burping a lot, Jerome. What's going on with that?
Indigestion.
But like a newer coach might be inclined to go, oh, you dig into that. He's like, indigestion. Oh, do you want to talk about that?
My intuition's telling me, my gut's telling me that
my gut's telling me that your gut is messed up.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're here for. Like, right? That's not what we're here to do. We're here to work on what our client has asked us to work on.
I just thought of this metaphor. Your client is not a tarot card to be read. They're not this mysterious group of symbols and metaphors that you're supposed to like intuit and then create a story about.
Some people get really irritated that that's not what their role is.
Yes, because they're attached to it as
their ego. That's their ego, though, right? Like I feel special because I have this amazing intuition, this amazing, ability to read people and tell them what they need. And no.
I went through a phase where I followed people like on social media that would like share intuitive stuff, and I got like kind of went into like a rabbit hole with this where I was like really believing everything that they were saying, and I finally had to go, okay, like I had to take a step back and just realize like these people are completely attached to what they're saying. They're not just like throwing it out there and saying, take what resonates and leave the rest. They're not doing that. They're saying, this is truth. I've received this truth, spiritually or whatever. And it's like, believe it or else. And I don't know. I definitely, that's off my algorithm now. I can promise you.
Well, I mean, that's what we were talking about earlier, is that their truth should be everybody's truth.
Yeah.
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 And that's where we can get into, that's not coaching, right? That's not, as a coach, we can't come in with that kind of intuition, the Mercury is in Venus's third quadrant, and because of that,
because of that, that's why. Didn't you know?
Brush your hair with your left hand for the rest of the month. Like that's, we can't bring that into coaching. Now, it might be true, and it might be true for you in other spaces, and it might, but in the coaching seat, that is not what coaching is.
Right.
This is not the case. So there's always a little bit of interesting space for people to like figure that out and figure it out. But I think what's important is in coaching, what like Anthony had said earlier, when you are learning an instrument, right? You learn the music, you learn how to hold it, you learn how to play certain notes, and you do it over and over and over again. And eventually it becomes easier and easier to read music, to play a sheet of music, to pick up that instrument and play. And maybe eventually you can improvise, you can create your own songs, you can do these amazing things. With coaching and coming into coaching, what happens is you learn all of these coaching tools, and we teach you I guess, a new way to be intuitive, right? We teach you a new form, like just like teaching the music, teaching you learn a coach's intuition, and you learn to use coaching in this process in a very specific way, and it becomes easier and easier,
I
right?
think a good metaphor is we teach you the scales, we teach you the fundamentals, so that in your coaching sessions you can improvise, and you can use your intuition to
So you can
improvise.
use with education, like it comes like that. It's important to have that piece, so that then you can be intuitive in the coaching seat.
The cool thing
But you
is,
have to have the education.
even though you may not ever become a coach, the tools work in every environment.
Yes, it's so true. So true. Having the ability to have a reflective inquiry style conversation is so incredibly valuable in any setting, honestly. Your relationships with people will be enhanced just by learning how to have that style conversation.
They'll just get really annoyed with you because you're always asking them questions.
Yeah, but if you do
pointing out their emotions,
you reflect in a way that has no attachment, like, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, I could be totally off here, but right, or you're just acknowledging that you're human, and then you're sharing. I don't know. I'm wondering if there's something more.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you sound like an idiot. What's going on there?
That's how question.
But there's so many times parenting.
Coaching in his.
Wait, say it again, Brooke.
So that's how Anthony uses coaching with his friends and his environment.
I would love to see it.
A client or somebody who is just coming, what they're recognizing is they don't have to be the all-knowing parent. They don't have to have the answers. They can give space for somebody else to have those answers. And the importance of that other person taking ownership is definitely a different experience and communication that opens things up for the better, period. It could, unless you're Anthony.
So, anyone final thoughts?
Are we done? Yeah,
I'm done.
We're done.
I actually just burped now. That's funny.
Our final thought is Jerome actually just burped.
I do have a final thought. I would say that if your gut is telling you something, I think there's something there. There's a
pay
foundation.
attention.
Yeah, but it might be telling you, in a moment of like angst, you're hungry or you're tired or something that maybe isn't the answer to what has whatever's been questions been posed to you. So I would say make sure you go ahead and do some research. So do some research. Again, I think something is happening. That's why your gut is having this reaction. But make sure you peel back some layers before you start making important decisions based off of that feeling.
Absolutely.
Exactly what you said. Like your gut maybe your gut or your intuition, it should leave it at that. It is a thing. I've noticed this is happening. Maybe I need to investigate further. Maybe I need to learn more. I think it should work as it's like a little, maybe a tiny light that shines on that goes, okay, we might want to look further into that and learn more and educate myself more about whatever that is and what's going on there. Maybe not a reason to go, jump on a plane and move to Hawaii right now.
Yeah,
Brooke was.
Although my gut is telling me to move to Hawaii.
Not a bad option.
Because we were looking,
your algorithm feeding you making you want to go.
We were just looking at places we asked a question, where is it always not hotter than 90 degrees?
90 degrees and not colder than 50 degrees. And then we were like, where is that? And Hawaii came up.
It was Hawaii.
Hawaii.
So we'll wrap it up there. Listen to your gut. maybe even trust your gut, but verify your guts.
Love it.
Yeah.
Don't be gullible towards your gut. And with that will end this self-sabotage. Next week we'll come back with a different self-sabotage topic. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment, and trust your gut and take our classes. Take
Yes.
Coaching 101 and 102.